There is a book from 1894 that proposes moving every person in America into one city, 60 million of them, in 24,000 towers clad in porcelain, no private kitchens anywhere, no competition of any kind, all of it powered by Niagara Falls. The man who wrote it was broke. A year later, he had a different idea, and you have almost certainly held it in your hand. 60 million people. That book was called The Human Drift, and about a third of it is taken up with the city. He named it Metropolis. It would be the only city on the continent. Very nearly everyone would live there. The plan puts it astride the Niagara River, drawing power from the falls, spreading across a stretch of upstate New York, wide enough to swallow 7 counties, and reaching over into Ontario if the Canadians agreed to it. He notes, in passing, that Canadian cooperation would be required, and moves on. Fresh water comes out of Lake Erie at one end. Waste goes into Lake Ontario at the other. The shape is a rectangle, roughly 135 miles long and 45 miles wide. Inside it stand the towers, 24,000 of them, arranged in a honeycomb around enormous domed courtyards, each one holding around 2,500 people. Between them run 15,000 miles of avenue, and the author promises that every foot of it would be a continuous change of beauty. There are more than 100 million rooms in the city, and they are all the same size. He explains why, and the reason is the most revealing sentence in the book. If every room is identical, a rug cut for one room fits every room, so rugs can be made by the million without waste. Nobody cooks. There are no kitchens in the apartments, because cooking 60 million separate dinners in 60 million separate kitchens is an absurd duplication of labor. Instead, there is communal dining under glass at the center of every building, and there is no competition, anywhere, in anything. Every industry in the country is folded into a single corporation, owned by all the citizens equally. One steel mill, one shoe factory. No advertising, because advertising exists to make you choose between things that are the same. No middlemen. Eventually, once the system settles, no money at all. The man who wrote that was 39 years old and sold bottle caps for a living. He had no capital, no factory, and no following, and he had published the book himself. It sank without trace, and the following year he had an idea in front of a shaving mirror that would make him one of the most recognized men on earth. That is the strange thing about King Camp Gillette. He is remembered as the great commercial genius of the disposable age, and 2 of the things he is most famous for turn out, on the record, to be things he never did. If that is the kind of thing you want more of, subscribe now, and the rest of these will come to you. The man who could not sell a razor. He was born on the 5th of January, 1855, in Fond du Lac, Wisconsin, and the family moved to Chicago when he was 4. 2 things about the household matter. The first is that they invented constantly. His father tinkered and held patents. His brothers did the same. His mother, Fannie Lemira Camp Gillette, wrote a cookbook called the White House Cookbook, which came out in 1887 and sold enormously for decades, so the family had watched at close range as a single product turned into a fortune. The second is that in 1871, the Great Chicago Fire took the family hardware business and most of what they owned. He was 16. The Gillettes went east, and he went out on the road as a traveling salesman at about 17, which is what he did for the next 20 years. He was good at it, and it did not make him rich. He filed patents of his own along the way, several of them, and none of them came to anything. By his own account, he lost around $20,000 on a machine for carbonating liquids. Then in 1891, he took a job at Crown Cork and Seal and met the man who ran it. William Painter had invented the Crown Cork, which is the fluted metal cap still on beer bottles today. Painter gave him the advice that everything afterward rests on. Invent something people use once and throw away. Then they have to come back and buy another one. Gillette said later that he went through the alphabet looking for a product that fit, and got nowhere for years. The story of what happened next is his own, told in 1918 in the company magazine, so take it as the company's founding story, rather than as a documented event. One morning in 1895, in Brookline, Massachusetts, he stood in front of the mirror with a razor too dull to use, and the whole thing arrived at once. A thin blade of steel, sharp on both edges, held in a clamp with a handle. When it went blunt, you would throw it away and clip in another. He wrote to his wife that he had it, and that their fortune was made. Their fortune took 6 more years. The problem was steel. He needed a wafer thin enough to be cheap and hard enough to hold an edge, and every expert he consulted told him it could not be done. Metallurgists at MIT told him it could not be done. Cutlery firms told him it could not be done. For 6 years, he was a salesman with a drawer full of useless prototypes. Those 6 years are easy to skim past in a summary. He was in his 40s. He had a wife and a son. He had already lost money on inventions before, and now he was spending everything he could spare on an idea that every qualified person he consulted had told him was physically impossible. He kept going anyway, for 6 years, on a hunch about a piece of metal. The man who solved it was William Emery Nickerson, an engineer and chemist trained at MIT, who worked out how to harden and sharpen sheet steel at industrial scale. So the invention that carries Gillette's name was made physically possible by a man almost nobody can name. 51 Razors American Safety Razor was incorporated on the 28th of September 1901 and renamed the Gillette Safety Razor Company the following year. Its first offices were rooms above a fish shop on Atlantic Avenue in Boston. It nearly died immediately. A Boston businessman named John Joyce put in the money that kept it alive, and in doing so bought himself a position that would matter enormously later. His patent application went in on the 3rd of December 1901. It was granted on the 15th of November 1904, and it covered the razor, the thin double-edged blade, and the combination of the two together. It ran for 17 years. Then production started, and the first year went like this: 51 razors, 168 blades. That is the entire output of 1903. A man could carry the year's production in a shopping bag. In 1904, they sold 90,884 razors. The published blade figures for that year vary wildly between sources, from a bit over 100,000 to more than 12 million, depending on whether somebody is counting blades or packets. So take the razors as the solid number: 90,000 in the second year, against 51 in the first. It kept climbing after that, and it did not stop climbing for the rest of his life. Now, the price. Because the price is where the legend falls apart. The set cost $5, fixed on the 9th of May 1903, and for that, you got the razor and 20 blades. To understand that number, you have to put it against a wage. $5 was roughly a third of an average weekly industrial wage at the time. For an unskilled laborer on $1 a day, it was 5 days of work. The professor who has studied this most closely, Randall Picker at the University of Chicago Law School, describes it as a premium product, comparable to a modern smartphone, and in real terms more expensive. So the razor that supposedly democratized shaving launched as a luxury item, and it stayed one for years. Replacement blades came in cheap packets after that, which is where the recurring money was always going to come from. He had understood that part from the beginning, and it is the part he genuinely deserves credit for. A man who buys a razor buys it once. A man who buys blades buys them for the rest of his life. And the company defended that price with genuine aggression. It printed warnings on the cartons that any dealer selling below $5 would be prosecuted. It watched dealers' newspaper advertisements and shop windows for evidence of discounting, all of which sits badly against the thing everybody knows about this company. Give away the handle, sell the blades forever. The razor and blades model. It is taught in business schools as the origin of an entire pricing strategy. Picker went through the record and found that during the whole life of the patents, from 1904 to 1921, the years when Gillette had the legal power to lock every competitor out of the blade market and could most easily have run that play, the company did not run it. It charged a premium, and it policed the price. The giveaway model arrived after the patents expired, when competitors could finally make blades and the company had to fight for the handle instead. The first real giveaway came in 1922, bundled with chewing gum. Picker's conclusion is that in a real sense, it was Gillette's competitors who invented razors and blades, and the legend has outrun the correction by a very wide margin. Look up King Camp Gillette in the Encyclopedia Britannica today, and you will find it stated plainly that he sold the razors at a loss and made his profits on the blades. It is in the reference books. It is in the business school syllabus. It is on the slide behind whoever is explaining the printer cartridge model to a room this afternoon. So the man is famous for a strategy he spent 17 years avoiding. The face on the wrapper. What he did do, and what nobody else had done at that scale, was put himself on the package. His portrait went onto the blade wrappers, engraved, with his signature under it. Every wrapper, every packet, for decades. Then the volumes went up. The razor spread first among men who could afford $5, then through the middle of the market, then everywhere. When the United States entered the First World War in 1917, the government ordered razors for the armed forces. 3.5 million razors, 36 million blades, which meant that a whole generation of American men learned to shave themselves, in uniform, with his razor, at government expense, and came home already in the habit. As a piece of commercial luck, it has few equals. The army did not just buy a large order. It taught several million men a daily routine, at an age when habits set, using a specific piece of equipment, and then sent them home to keep doing it at their own expense for the next 50 years. No advertising campaign in history has ever done anything remotely like that. By the 1920s, the face on the wrapper was one of the most reproduced human images in the world. There is a line in the company's own history about markets where nobody spoke English, where customers did not ask for Gillette blades because they could not read the name. They asked for the ones with the man's face on them. He was rich. He was recognized in countries he had never visited. He had a mansion, a chauffeur, and the kind of fame that attaches to an image rather than to a person. There is something odd about that portrait once you know what he believed. A trademarked face is the most concentrated form of advertising there is. It says that this object, which is identical in every meaningful respect to the competing object beside it, is different because a specific man stands behind it. That is the whole mechanism, and he put it on billions of packets. He also, quietly, had a second career. Between 1894 and 1924, he published 3 books arguing that the mechanism he had just perfected should be dismantled entirely. And the entire time the razors were selling, he was writing. What he actually wanted that book was not a one-off. He went back to the same argument for the rest of his life, in book after book, while the razor money came in. It stayed consistent for 30 years, and he never softened a line of it. Competition is waste. 2 factories making the same shoe, 2 salesmen covering the same town, 2 brands of the same soap arguing with each other in the newspapers. All of it is effort spent producing nothing. Advertising is the purest form of that waste, because it exists to make people choose between things that are functionally identical. Middlemen are the same. The retail system is the same. His solution was to merge every industry in the country into one corporation, owned in equal shares by every citizen, run by engineers on the evidence rather than by owners on the profit. Once it worked properly, money would become unnecessary and quietly disappear. It is easy to file that under crankery, and plenty of his contemporaries did. It helps to know he was not alone in it. 1888 had produced Edward Bellamy's Looking Backward, a novel about a cooperative future America that sold in the hundreds of thousands and spawned discussion clubs in towns all over the country. By 1900, something like 160 utopian books had been published in the United States. Gillette was writing into a genuine movement in the years after the Panic of 1893, when unemployment in the industrial cities was catastrophic, and the Pullman strike had been put down by federal troops. What separates him from the rest of that movement is that one of them got rich by accident. In 1910, he published a book called World Corporation and registered a real company in the Arizona Territory to be the vehicle for it, and then he did the thing that everything else here hangs on. He wrote to Theodore Roosevelt and offered him $1 million to serve as president of the World Corporation. That figure needs sitting with. This is 1910. Roosevelt has been out of the White House for about a year and is the most famous man in America. Gillette is offering him $1 million, in 1910 money, to run an organization whose stated purpose is the abolition of profit and the eventual abolition of money. Roosevelt said no. There was no counter-offer. There was no second letter. The million was never paid. The funding scheme behind it, 20 subscriptions of $50,000 each, was never raised. The World Corporation did nothing and went nowhere. He was not finished. In 1924, at 69 years old, he published The People's Corporation, which the novelist Upton Sinclair helped him write. He paid about $25,000 of his own money to advertise it. A man who believed advertising should be abolished bought advertising for a book explaining why advertising should be abolished. He seems never to have found that funny, and nobody came. The books sold poorly. No industry merged. No engineer took charge of anything. He had spent 3 decades and a great deal of effort on an argument that the country declined to have with him, while the razor he had thought about for one morning in front of a mirror went into every bathroom on Earth. The year he sold. 2 things happened in 1910, and they belong together. One is the Roosevelt offer. The other is that in that same year, King Camp Gillette sold roughly 2/3 of his stock in the Gillette Safety Razor Company to John Joyce, for a figure reported at about $900,000. He took about $900,000 for most of his stake in the razor company, and he offered $1 million, more than he had just been paid, to hire a president for the company that was going to replace capitalism. That is as close as the record comes to a man trying to hand his fortune over to an idea. He never managed it. Roosevelt turned him down, the subscriptions never came in, and in the end there was nothing solid enough to hand anything to. I want to be accurate about this, because the tidy version of his life says the utopia ruined him, and that is false. The books cost him time and about $25,000 in advertising. The $1 million he offered Roosevelt was never paid out. What the dream cost him was 30 years of attention and whatever he might have done with it, and the loss of interest in running the company that was making him rich. The sale did accomplish one thing. It ended his power at his own company. He stepped back from active management in 1913. He kept the title of president and a role that amounted to touring and being photographed, which suited a man whose face was the trademark. When John Joyce died in 1916, a New York banker named Edward Aldred bought the Joyce shares and took control. From that point, Gillette owned a shrinking piece of a company he did not run, which carried his name on the door and his face on every wrapper leaving the building. It is a peculiar arrangement to sit inside. The company had every reason to keep him visible, and no reason at all to let him decide anything. He was more valuable as a portrait than as a president, and the portrait did not argue about strategy or ask why the blade price had gone up. He was 58 when he stopped running it, and he had another 19 years left. There is a version of this where that is a happy ending. He had taken his money out near the top. He had his name in every bathroom in America, and he was free to write. He spent those years writing, traveling, being photographed, and putting his capital into the ground in California. The land. The money went somewhere with nothing to do with cities. In the 1920s, he moved his life to California and put his fortune into land. He grew dates and citrus in the Coachella Valley, which was then being planted out by a handful of families who had worked out that the desert would grow almost anything once you got water to it. There is a certain symmetry in the man who wanted one enormous planned city, spending his last productive years on a few hundred acres of desert orchard. He built a house in Palm Springs, up on the mesa, a modest place by the standards of what he could afford at the time. And in 1926, he bought a long stretch of the Santa Monica Mountains at Calabasas and had Wallace Neff, the fashionable architect of the moment, build him a Spanish colonial house on it. 25 rooms, a tiled fountain in the middle of it, looking out over rolling hills full of oaks. It was finished in 1929, a matter of months before the market fell. That ranch is public land now. 588 acres of it were bought by a partnership of state and federal agencies in 2005 and opened as a park 2 years later. People walk their dogs through it. And he borrowed. California land in the 1920s went up every year, and the way you made money on it was to buy with debt and let the rise do the work. He rode that all the way up, and by the end of the decade he was, according to his biographer, roughly $2 million in debt. 2 weeks or so before the crash of October 1929, he went to the company and tried to sell his remaining Gillette stock to clear the loans. The directors talked him out of it. They had a reason. It was a good one. Their reasoning was not complicated. The man on the wrapper dumping his own shares would have been read exactly one way by the market, and the company could not afford it. So he held. Gillette stock had been near $100 in early 1929. By October of 1930, it was in the low 30s. Then the company was forced into a patent fight with Henry Gaisman of Autostrop, and the audit that came with the settlement found that Gillette had overstated its profits by something like $12 million over 5 years. The shares went to around 18. Gaisman took the chairmanship in May of 1931, and the old guard went with the settlement. Gillette resigned the presidency he had been holding in name only. He was 76, his land was mortgaged past its value, and the stock that was going to cover it had lost most of what it was worth. The order of that sequence is what makes it cruel. He put his money in land. The land needed the stock to cover the debt. The company stopped him selling the stock to protect the value of the company. Then the company's own accounts turned out to be overstated, which took the stock down further than the crash alone would have. Every stage of that was somebody making a defensible decision, and the sum of them removed a fortune. None of that is a betrayal or a conspiracy. He borrowed heavily against land in a boom, and the boom ended, which happened to a great many people in exactly the same years. It is the most ordinary ending available, and it is what took the money. The man in the bathrobe. In the last years, he was a familiar figure around the Desert Inn in Palm Springs, wandering in wearing a worn-out bathrobe. Guests would ask who he was. Nellie Kaufman, who ran the place, would tell them that this was King C. Gillette, and that he had practically kept the hotel in the black for the last few years. He died on the 9th of July, 1932, at the ranch in Calabasas. He was 77. He was interred at Forest Lawn in Glendale, in the Great Mausoleum, and his widow sold the ranch 3 years later to a film director. The contemporaneous reporting described him as almost bankrupt, with his estate and his real estate sold off at substantial losses. There is no clean probate figure to give you, and anybody who gives you one precisely is guessing. 7 years later, in 1939, the board of the Gillette Safety Razor Company voted his widow a pension of $200 a month, because otherwise she would have had very little. The company was by then one of the most profitable consumer businesses in the world, and it was paying the founder's widow a small monthly allowance to keep her comfortable. And the face stayed on the wrapper. That is the part I keep returning to. He lost control of the company in 1910 and 1913. He lost his power entirely in 1916. He was pushed off the board in 1931 and dead in 1932. Through all of it, and for years after it, his portrait and his signature went out on packet after packet, into millions of bathrooms, in countries where nobody had heard of him, and people simply asked for the blades with the man's face. The company he did not control kept selling him long after he had stopped being anybody. There is a small detail that sits at the bottom of all this. He had spent his whole writing life attacking the idea of a brand, on the grounds that a brand is a way of charging more for the same thing. And the single most durable asset he ever created was one. Now set the two ledgers side by side, because they are both remarkable. The things he got right make a longer list than he is given credit for. He understood before almost anyone that the money in a product is in what people have to buy again. He worked out that a face makes a brand, and that a brand outlives a patent. He saw the century of disposable goods coming, and he built the first great one. What he got wrong was everything he cared about. Nobody merged the industries. Competition did not end. Advertising did not end. Money did not end. And he spent his last years desperately short of it. The predictions he made deliberately all failed, and the ones he made almost in passing, about habit and repeat purchase and the power of a name, turned out to describe the century. Not one brick of Metropolis was ever laid, and no part of it was ever attempted. There is no city beside Niagara Falls. There are the falls, doing what they have always done, and there is a hydroelectric station, and that is all. I think he understood the machinery of the 20th century better than almost any of his contemporaries, and wanted almost none of it. He designed a city out of porcelain because porcelain lasts. Every room identical, every building the same, 60 million people in a structure meant to stand for centuries without needing paint. Then he spent his working life making an object designed to be used for a week and dropped in a bin, and the only thing of his that lasted was his own face, printed on the wrapper of the thing you throw away. In 2005, the company he founded sold to Procter & Gamble for around $57 billion. The city was never built. The face is still in production. One question before you go. 60 million people, one city, no competition, no advertising, no private kitchens, and every apartment exactly the same as every other. Tell me in the comments whether you would have moved in. Hit subscribe and we'll see you in the next one.